Hey everybody, and welcome back to Good Reads, where today we are going to do Explain Like I'm 5. The reason why we are going to explain like I'm 5 is merely answer the question that is not enough, which is friendly and simplified, and it is an accessible explanation which is not going to aim towards a literal 5-year-old. So let's just say it like that. So, it's not dead. The Great Barrier Reef is now considered quote unquote dead, and what factors led to it? Well, that's a clickbait. The Great Barrier Reef is absolutely massive. A significant portion of it is in serious decline, but other parts of it are doing just fine so far. So the corals are bleaching. Most corals, but not all, have a symbiotic partnership with a type of algae, well, not algae, chroma violata called zooxanthellae. Well, I don't know how to pronounce that, which lives in the tissue of the coral. The coral protects the algae with its stinging cells and by generally being poisonous as fuck. And the algae shares food that it photosynthesizes with the coral. Corals are animals, though, so they can just eat stuff, mostly filter feeding. Some corals do not have zooxanthellae algae, they just filter the feed. Now, when stressed, like for instance when the water gets too warm, the corals flush all their zooxanthellae out of their tissue. Scientists are not entirely sure why they do this. The zooxanthellae is where corals get all the ridiculously amazing colors you see. The zooxanthellae can also be killed by toxic substances in the water that do not kill the coral, leaving them without their algae. Just to give you an idea, here's what a typical anemone would look like, but there's a bleached anemone with no zooxanthellae. The latter anemone is still alive, but it may not be for long. Now, when the coral bleaches, it's possible that it can absorb algae from the environment and start over. However, it's not very usually likely. Usually, once a coral bleaches, it slowly dies. And once the living tissue is gone, pest algae species will grow up on top of the skeleton and prevent new coral tissue from recolonizing it. About 20% of the Great Barrier Reef is bleached out, meaning that the corals are either already dead or they're dying. The algae is gone, and since it's huge swaths of the reef all bleached out, it's very bad for the corals to pick up zooxanthellae because none of their neighbors have any of them either. Now, there are a few reasons for the Great Barrier Reef bleaching. A great deal of it has to do with global climate change. The 2-degree average increase may not sound like much. You have to think about what kind of wild temperature changes it takes to swing the average of the entire planet. The corals are very sensitive to temperature because of how well water both reflects heat and holds on to heat. The reefs don't change temperature much, but the increased average temperatures around the globe have created intense high spikes of temperature, raising the water temperature higher than what the corals could deal with. Another significant problem is the crown of thorns starfish. These starfish eat the polyps of the tissue in the corals. They create scars on the skeletons where tissue is missing. That leads to the pest algae growth, competing with the coral tissue for access to the skeleton. Also, believe it or not, corals can get infections. The damaged tissue can let the infections of parasites into the tissue. Corals can occasionally do something called rapid tissue necrosis, or RTM, for no apparent reason, but it usually shows up when the tissue has been damaged in one place. Basically, one part of the coral starts dying, and then within a day or so, the entire coral is dead. Normally, crown of thorns starfish are bad for reefs because they can slow down the fastest growing cells so the slower ones can have a chance to catch up. Like any predator, they protect this prey species by creating room for more of them to grow. But for some reason, probably somewhat related to global warming, scientists think maybe the crown of thorns starfish are reproducing and marauding around the Indo-Pacific reefs as massive colonies that devastate whatever reef they wander into, like underwater locusts. It's not clear what's going on, though, especially since this stems to be a cyclical occurrence happening about every 17 years. So it might be completely natural and just has very unfortunate timing to happen. Now, while the reefs are already in really poor shape, or climate change may be causing an abnormal increase in their numbers, some combination of the two, well, in any case, as the reefs die, the life around it dies too. There are a number of creatures that rely on corals for food or safety. Angelfish and parrotfish both eat corals, and some angelfish are obligate corallivores. Their diet must include corals. Clownfish obviously rely on anemones for safety. A lot of fish hide among the corals, using the stinging and poison of the corals to ward off bigger predators that they can't get between the corals. As the corals disappeared, those fish disappear too. Then the bigger predators of those fish, like sharks and eels and whatnot, start disappearing too. With no shelter, tangs like blue wrinkled tangs get picked off by hungry predators. Tangs are a vital part of the health of the reef since they graze on algae that would otherwise grow on the reef, competing it with corals for real estate under the skin. The corals can't grow fast enough to keep up with the algae, so the algae chokes it out. That kills more coral, which means less food for the corallivores, and less shelter, which means fewer of these fish, and fewer of the hungrier predators, which means fewer tangs, which means more algae. The original non-clickbait article was talking about the fact that because of the bleaching, large parts of the Great Barrier Reef are not expected to reproduce like they normally do. Without making a long post even longer, corals coordinate their sexual reproduction, and that time is coming up. But with much of the reef very stressed out, those parts probably won't be able to participate, which will just keep the reef from recovering. So, moral of the story, imagine the rainforest, but all the trees are turning in white and can't photosynthesize food anymore. So everything that lives in the trees or around the trees, and everything that eats the trees, and everything that eats the things that eat the trees are in danger because the trees are slowly dying. So we definitely need to be careful. We definitely need to take care of the Great Barrier Reef. And parts are in really tough shape right now, but it's still a ways from being completely dead or completely unrecoverable. So that's pretty much it from what I've learned. That's your explanation, like your 5. Let me know what you think about this explanation, comments below. Don't forget to thumb up and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Good Reads, and I will see you next time.